My answer to the hard problem of how do you actually get people to believe that you are legitimate is completely unusual. And I think a lot of people don't really understand this. Let me explain. So I was thinking about this hard problem. The hard problem is how do you convince people that you're legitimate and they should actually select or pay attention to you in some sort of way? And that problem exists in a lot of different arenas, right? Maybe it's you're trying to get into some sort of educational program, maybe a PhD program. Maybe it's getting a job someplace. Maybe it's trying to attract a mate. You're trying to demonstrate to somebody that you're legitimate. And this problem exists in all walks of life. But most of us think in terms of the straight and narrow of the way that you're supposed to do this. You do everything right. You checkbox everything as much as you possibly can, right? So to get into a PhD program, for example, or any educational program, is that you have, high test scores, you have, all of the right, all of the right degrees, all of the right things. You've done everything right. And what you're going to find out is whenever you do that, most of the time, it's not going to work out for you. It's not going to be the one thing that makes you stand out, particularly as it gets more and more rigorous and more challenging, and you want somebody, someplace, to pay attention to what you're actually doing and understand what you're trying to do. And that's because everybody else is vying for those resources or vying for that attention. Everybody looks all the same, right? They all look the same. And so the answer is somewhat counterintuitive. Actually, it's really counterintuitive because it's very hard for almost all of us to actually do. And that is, and it's not just doing something innovative and all that sort of things that you hear about, but it's doing something that you know will fail, that will not work out, and you have every belief to say, don't do this. And this makes no sense at this current moment. I was thinking about that as sort of all of the moments where, that there was some sort of thing that happened in my life is because I followed through on that. And, the challenge is that you need to do both of those particular things. You need to try to checkbox everything as much as you can, but then do something that is completely original. But the only way that you could do something completely original and do something that is unique is to do something that you know will fail. And it's going into this particular thing. That's where it's very challenging. You go into this particular thing, and some people will call that risk, right? But for me, I often sort of imagine it in the way that we feel about it, or we think about it, is that you're doing it knowing that this doesn't make sense. People are going to ridicule you. You're not going to fit in by doing this. Some people, a small amount of people might say, hey, this is a wonderful thing that you're actually doing. But most people are not going to get it. And so it's your job to pursue this thing with as much rigor as possible to not only delude yourself and convince yourself, but also to convince other people that this thing is legitimate. And this becomes the challenging part of walking the fine line where you're convincing people that you're different and unique, but at the same time, you're communicating that you have some sort of skill set to other people that people get, that people want. And it's this combination of the two where you're standing out. It's kind of like you imagine yourself that you're on a pirate ship and you're walking the plank, and you kind of have to stand out and walk on the plank and then be ready to swim when you have to jump off that plank. And you have to figure out how to do that particular thing, knowing that it's not going to work out from the get-go, and having that strength that you're going to do this regardless of what happens. And so when you do this, and the challenge too with this is that you have a tendency to give up, right? Almost everybody does, right? It's not a fun thing when you're sticking out, when you're not you're doing things intentionally you believe are not going to make sense, they're going to fail, all of those kind of things, right? And so nobody wants to do those particular things. That's why it feels that way, because nobody else wants to do them. And everybody else looks at that and says, hey, this has a high chance of failure and it's not going to work out. But it's that act of doing it and repeatedly doing it and getting up and doing it every single day that matters, right? And that's how you often demonstrate to other people that you're legitimate, that you're actually trying, that you're doing something that is unique, and you're doing something that can matter. And all of this can work in many different areas. I want you to think about this, right? You want to demonstrate to get into a PhD or program or some sort of educational program. Often you have to do something like write a software program, for example, or write some code. That requires you to do it on the weekends, requires you to give up a lot of your life when you're working. Some of us might be working, and you give up all of that stuff knowing that it makes no sense and nobody else is going to get it except for you. Or you do courses, for example, on the weekend or in evenings just to increase your skill level. Nobody else gets it except for you. And you want to give up on it as well. You think that it's not working out. Now, it's kind of the same thing even when you're trying to attract a mate, right? If you have all of the things that are straight and narrow, you're not standing out from anybody, right? And so you have to get up and ask or pursue or just take that little inkling, which, man, it's hard for all of us to do that at any point, to stand up and be a little bit different than what everybody else is doing, what everybody else is being like. And that's the story with much of what we actually have to do, is that you have to demonstrate that, yes, you fit in with the check boxes, with what everybody is expecting, but then you're willing to do something that everybody is afraid of. And nobody wants to do this thing. And you're willing to stand up and do it every single day. And everybody else is sitting there thinking, well, that's crazy. I don't know why you're doing that. But that's the point. That's how you get people to pay attention, to understand where you're going, to really say, wait a minute, this is legitimate. This is something that I believe in too. And all it takes is that one person out of 1,000 to believe in what you're actually doing before you find the right combination. I know all of this is hard. I know many of us don't want to do this. It's often what it is. You have to be the one that's willing to pursue, willing to get back up and do it again, despite the fact that even yourself thinks it's crazy. Even yourself wants to give up. But you do it anyways, every single day.